In this video, we're going to take a look at how to find the determinant of a 3 by 3 matrix using the diagonal method. I don't necessarily like to teach the diagonal method because it is not a method that you can use on any other size matrix except for the 3 by 3 matrix. So let's go ahead and take a look at this method. I will require you to know both the diagonal method and expansion by minors, because expansion by minors can be used on any size matrix outside of the 2 by 2, which has its own rule on how to calculate the determinant. Alright, so for the diagonal method, the very first thing I do is I copy the columns in this matrix down. So we have a 0, 1, negative 2, and we have a 5, 3, and a 2, a 1, a negative 1, and a 4. And I'm going to repeat the first two columns. 0, 1, negative 2, 5, 3, 2. For those that watched my last video using expansion by minors to find the determinant of a 3 by 3, this is the same exact example I used then. So I know the answer is supposed to be negative 2. So now we're going to calculate that again with the diagonal method. So what I do to remind myself whether I'm adding or subtracting is that I go ahead and write a plus, and a plus over the first three columns, and a minus, and a minus under the first three columns. And it'll be clear why I do that in just a second. So the next step that I do is I start at the very top left-hand corner of my matrix, and I draw a diagonal directly through those three numbers. I notice that above this column is a plus, so I am adding it, and then I just multiply all those numbers together. 0, 3, 4, 0 times 3 times 4. Then I move over one diagonal and draw a diagonal through those three numbers. I notice that above this diagonal is a plus, so I will be adding plus 5 times negative 1 times negative 2. And then I move over again one diagonal, and I notice there's an addition above it, so I will be adding the product of these numbers. 1 times 1 times 2. So now I'm going to go ahead and pick a different color to draw through my diagonal. And this time, I'm going to start at the top right-hand corner and draw a diagonal through here. And I notice at the bottom is a subtraction. So I'm going to subtract the product of those numbers. 5 times 1 times 4. I move over a diagonal, and I notice there's a subtraction at the bottom. I'm going to subtract the product of those numbers. So minus 0 times negative 1 times 2. And then again, I move over one diagonal. I notice that there is a subtraction underneath. So I'm going to subtract the product of those numbers on that diagonal. 1 times 3 times negative 2. So now all that's left is to do the calculation, and we should get a negative 2. The most common mistake is multiplying by 0. It is not 1, it's not 3, it's not 4. It is always 0. When you multiply by 0, it doesn't matter what you're multiplying outside of the 0, you will always get 0. So this very first multiplication results in a 0. The second one, we're going to go ahead and add 10. This third one, we're adding 2. This fourth one, we're subtracting 20. The fifth one, we are subtracting, again, there's a 0 there, so we're subtracting 0. And the last one, we are subtracting a negative 6. So if we go ahead and do this calculation from left to right, remember left to right, we get 12 minus 20 plus 6. Which is negative 8 plus 6, which results in a negative 2. And we can do this with any 3 by 3 determinant, so we can use the diagonal method. So let's go ahead and try that process again. And we'll just randomly pick a 3 by 3 to use. Let's do 1, 0, 2, -7, 4, 3, 0, -1, -6. Alright, the most common way is not to actually duplicate this determinant, but just to repeat the first two columns. So I'm going to go ahead and write the first two columns on the outside of this determinant. And then again, I'm going to write the plus above the first 3 and then the minus below the first 3. Take my red pen out and draw along my diagonal. There's a plus in front. So now I'm going to add the product of these three numbers. When I move over a column, I'm adding the product of these three numbers. 0, whoops, that is a 3. And a 0. And then I'm going to add the product of those three numbers, which is 2, -7, and -1. And then I'm going to start at the top right corner. Oops, I should have had that on blue. And I notice there's a subtraction underneath, so I'm going to subtract the product of these three numbers. And then I'm going to move over a column and I'm going to subtract again the product of these three numbers. And then my very last diagonal subtraction again. And it's 2 times 4 times 0. Alright, so let's go ahead and calculate that. I'm going to go ahead and cross off anything that's going to be a 0. So let's go ahead and cross anything that has a factor of 0 out because it won't affect anything. So I really only have 3 calculations to do. I have 1 times 4 times -6, and that's going to be a -24. I'm going to add to that 2 times -7 times -1, which is going to be a 14. And then I'm going to subtract from that 1 times 3 times -1 is a -3. So if we do our math left to right, -10 plus 3, the determinant of this 3 by 3 using the diagonal method is -7.